So, morning everybody. I'm Marie Jenkins from Advance Your Wellbeing, and today's episode we're going to be interviewing Nick Atkins. Hi, Nick. How are you?
Morning. Hi, I'm really good, thanks. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for joining me for our April Housing Week podcast interview. So let's find out a bit more about you because I know you're doing some incredible things at Yorkshire Housing. So tell me a bit about your role and a bit about Yorkshire Housing.
I'm fortunate enough to be chief exec at Yorkshire Housing, and I've been there just short of 2 years. And Yorkshire Housing does what it says on the tin. So we have around about 20,000 homes that are across the length of breadth of God's own country, Yorkshire. So that's 100 miles north to south, 100 miles east to west. We've got plans to build another 8,000 homes, as well as invest in our existing homes and places. And our reason for being is about making it possible for people to have a place that they can call home.
Yeah, I've been reading your five business priorities, and we'll touch on those further on in the interview. But I want to know a bit more. If you've been with Yorkshire Housing then a couple of years, what sort of led you into working in social housing? And can you give us a bit of background of your career?
Yeah, I'm laughing because the call I was on before this was with our GEM graduates, and I was explaining my background to them. And I'm originally from Doncaster, so hence a long-suffering Donny Rovers fan. And much to my dad's horror, I took a university place across the Pennines in Manchester. And the last 2 years of my sort of studies were geography and environmental studies, but that was all housing related stuff. So I really got bitten by the housing bug. So unlike most people, I probably chose to go into housing. A lot of people just sort of generally tend to find it because I've got 3 kids and none of mine have ever grown up sort of saying I either want to be a pilot, an astronaut, or I want to work in housing. It's not a sort of automatic sort of career path. When I graduated, I had 2 job choices: a trainee store manager for B&Q in Penrith, or a job working for Warrington Council in their housing team. I decided that because I don't like the cold, Penrith sounded a bit too cold in a big drafty B&Q warehouse. So I thought, you know what, I'll go for the housing one. And then that's sort of, I've been in housing ever since and absolutely love it. Love the fact that, no 2 days are the same. I've worked for locally based organisations, regional organisations, and national organisations in a variety of roles, and I've just been dead lucky. And my career has advanced purely on the basis that I've worked with some fantastic people, but also that at certain points in my career, people have taken a bit of a gamble on me. They've sort of said, not sure if you can do this or not, but we'll give him a go and see if he's up to it. And so, yeah, so I suppose I've just been fortunate in terms of who I've worked with and just some of the opportunities that presented themselves to me. And I always say to people, the only thing really that holds you back is you. So you just got to go for it. And yeah, a bit of blag sometimes don't go amiss either. Don't know anyone.
I think you're being quite humble there, Nick, to be fair, because everybody that I speak to, sort of, they hold you in high esteem. So I think you're being quite humble there, but yeah.
Well,
So
I've made a career on the basis that you only need to know 2% more than the person opposite you to sound credible. So that works for me.
very good, very good. So let's take us back to Earth now. I mean, we've got the roadmap and we're heading out of lockdown. Um, but I know you've done a lot of work at Yorkshire Housing, reviewing your priorities. So um, in relation to that, how have you been adapting to the changes over the lockdowns and as we're coming out? Let's talk a bit more about those priorities.
Yeah, so we'd signed off our new business strategy 5 weeks before we went into lockdown. So it was the end of February. We got all the business together. First time we'd had all the business together in a number of years, and we launched a new business strategy. And then 5 weeks later, we had once in a 100-year pandemic. And so once we'd sort of started to respond to that, and once we'd got settled into that way of working, we reviewed those priorities, and interestingly, they were more relevant and have been more relevant during the last year than we probably even imagined they would be. And sitting alongside that are also our values as well. And I think it's really helped guide us probably more than we imagined really it would. But also I think what the pandemic has done, and you know, accepting but putting to one side the dreadful aspects of this pandemic and this disease and how it's affected so many people's lives. But my view is you've also got to look at, well, what are the opportunities or what positives have you taken from this time? And I think there's two really for our organisation. I think the first one is, I know we're not on our own in terms of in this, but I think it's helped us really reconnect back with our customers and our core purpose and our sort of, you know, our social responsibility for being in effect. You know, we during the pandemic, particularly during the early days, we made first of all a conscious decision not to furlough anybody because of the impact that could have on people's well-being, and the uncertainty that we thought that would give at the time. But also secondly, we thought we could actually use those resources, those people skills that those people perhaps couldn't do their own job at that time, but actually they can still communicate with other humans. And actually what we wanted to do was to proactively reach out to, you know, the sort of 20,000 odd households that we where we had homes, and offer support, whether that was just a listening ear, whether that was doing some shopping, whether that was, you know, providing them with some financial advice and money coaching, because, you know, there are a lot of people who are affected by this pandemic who've never previously had to enter into the benefits system. And so again, that proactive reaching out, people not aware we did that, people not aware that was available, I think really helped us reconnect back with our social purpose. So I think that's for me the first. The second sort of positive has been that it's acted as a real accelerant for what some people are calling the future of work debate. But you know, we will come out of this pandemic in the way that many others will, working in a very different way. So, you know, we will not go back to working in an office 5 days a week, 9 to 5. We will not go back to people, you know, being rammed on a dirty, late, overpriced Transpennine Express train with your nose stuck under somebody's armpit just so that you can go and bang a keyboard for 8 hours a day at a desk somewhere. You know, those days have gone. And by the way, my proudest Twitter moment ever was being blocked by Transpennine Express. So I sort of say, I suppose there are other train providers as well available, just in case they worry that I'm not being personal. But I think what that's done is it's enabled us to develop our completely refreshed approach to work, which is around hub, home, and roam. Although some of my colleagues heard Rome and thought that it was going to be a passport to Italy, I did have to say, no, it's ROAM, not ROME. And I suppose it's reflecting the fact that thinking about post-pandemic, because at the moment we don't have a choice, do we? We're all sat in home, or for some of my colleagues that they're out delivering frontline services, but on essential needs. But if you think about post-pandemic, we're going to come out of this and people are going to be able to work in a very sort of different way of operating. So for me, the hub is where you would go to get energized, to collaborate for a purpose, to come together, to sort of, you know, do a piece of work or to get some fresh thinking. And that almost acts as a bit of an input of energy. It's like taking a glass of Barocca and then going out and that lasting and having a long lasting impact. home, just to enable people to flex their sort of the way that they work, and then roam, and we just enable people to work anywhere. So one of the things we're doing at the moment is we're in discussions with all the other housing associations in Yorkshire and Humber to say, well, actually, could we all create an area in our offices, which are now all too big for our needs, where staff from other housing associations can just drop in for loo, brew, and a bit of Wi-Fi. That's basically what people need, isn't it? And that way you can sort of work much more collaboratively. And we've GIS mapped where all of our colleagues live, and I've overlaid where all of these offices are. And it's really interesting because where there's concentrations of my colleagues, there's also a couple of offices that are there, and you sort of think, well, actually, people don't have to travel in to a particular place. They could use these more locally. And I suppose what we're trying to get to is the 20-minute neighborhood. So this concept whereby you no longer have to travel huge distances to do things, whether that's sort of homework or play. Really, it's that thing about, well, actually that's normally within a 20-minute sort of travel distance. It's great for the environment, but the driver for us is that this completely new way of working, which includes a new agile working contract for our colleagues, also enables us and is directly linked to us providing a much more diverse and responsive customer offer. Because prior to the pandemic, our customer offer was 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. It was pretty traditional. But that no longer meets the needs of customers in 2021.
True.
People want, you and I want different things. If I can't get Amazon to deliver me something, the next day, I'm really grumpy. It's like, why is that not happening? And it's that whole thing about overlaying our expectations in terms of what our housing service should look like and making sure that we deliver against that. So those changes in how our people work are directly linked to a change and overhaul in our customer experience, so that's just a world apart from where it was pre-pandemic.
I mean, I love the strapline that you use about focusing on people rather than buildings as part of one of your priorities, which is around sort of being the employer of choice at Yorkshire Housing. So well-being, you've mentioned that briefly before. So can we talk a bit more about that in relation to how you're checking in as, if this is working so successfully, the agile approach for you guys, how are you checking in on staff's well-being?
So I think the last the last year has been in 3 chunks, hasn't it? So there was the first lockdown, which for many people, after you got over the initial uncertainty of it all, was quite interesting and novel, and people were adapting to it and thinking, oh, you know what, I've got this. And then we went into the second phase of sort of where it felt like constantly shifting sands of tears, and you had Eat Out to Help Out, where you were like all encouraged to go out and sort of mix with thousands of people, and then suddenly it was like, oh, hang on a minute, we need to start sort of tearing up the country, and I suppose that was a bit weird and a bit clunky, and you didn't quite know where things were heading. But I think the third lockdown, the one since Christmas, has been really difficult, probably partly due to the weather, but also just because, until quite recently, it's felt like there was no real sort of end in sight. And suddenly this bright light of the vaccine has appeared. And what are we at now? I think it's 24 or 25 million people who've had their first dose. So I think that starts to give you sort of hope for the future. But I think within all of that, it's been really difficult for everybody. I don't think there's been anybody in the country who hasn't at some point thought, I've had enough of this. I'm finding it really hard. What we've done is we've recognised that, and particularly the fact that you can't get together with people, so it's a lot more difficult. So we've picked up on this, and we've done quite a bit of work with our wellbeing first aiders. So we've trained a raft of people at all levels in the business to I suppose spot the warning signs. When people are either on calls like this, or for example, you know, when people might not have their camera on for several meetings, or, you know, that, or their tone, or the way that they're acting, just asking that question, you know, are you okay? And then asking, are you really okay?
Yeah.
You know, and really sort of making sure that people feel that they can speak out and share their stories. And that's been one of the things we've done. We've done a whole series of sessions with managers and every colleague across the business on well-being. And basically the mantra is it's okay to not be okay. And you know, that's been our sort of way of speaking. And you know, we've got people to share stories, and I've shared my own personal story of, you know, how I didn't cope particularly well when my dad passed away 6 years ago. And the way I dealt with that was not probably the way that it didn't do me a lot of favors in terms of how I was at that time. But I didn't recognize it until probably a little bit later on. So I think it's creating a culture more than anything where people feel that they, you know, they can sort of say, you know what, I'm struggling with this. And on a personal level, I you know, I will always, well, not always, but I suppose it depends on how what I'm seeing in front of me, but I'll always ask people what score they are out of 10. And you can't be 7. You can't be 7. And I think that's an interesting indicator, because even if people say, oh, I'm a 6 or an 8, you know, my sort of next question normally will be, well, what would get you to you know, a 7 or an 8? What would get you to a 9? You know, it's that thing about just understanding and just spending a little bit of time talking around how people are feeling and how people are coping. Because it has been incredibly hard, hasn't it? You know, this whole thing of being isolated from people. You know, I've not seen my mum for months. I have on video calls, but not seen her for months. I've not seen my colleagues for months. You know, my biggest risk is I'll see my colleagues and end up throwing my arms around them. I'll be bloody like, God, stay away from them, you know. But it's like, you know, as humans, this is an incredibly difficult process, isn't it? To cut yourself off from tactile sort of contact with people, but also just being able to see people in the flesh. Yeah, and we've recruited 1 in 5 of our colleagues. We've got 650 colleagues. 1 in 5 of them have been recruited in the last 12 months. In other words, 1 in 5 have not met other people in person in the business. And again, it's that sort of way of, we need to not only cope with how things are now, but also recognize that as we start to return to a new normality, actually we'll need to do some work with people, because some people will be probably mildly agoraphobic and slightly worried about returning to you know, environments where there are more people than perhaps we've been used to. So
It's really what I'd say is that you mentioned there about the culture of your organisation, and I know you've gone through a whole process of refreshing your values. And I'm really actually encouraged by the sort of things you're looking at, so that, you know, it's fantastic that you've been able to carry on recruiting over the last sort of, well, over 12 months. But you're looking at things like creating trust with your staff. You're looking at encouraging them to be curious, which I think is fantastic for innovation. And like achieving impact. I mean, they're really sort of fantastic values to sort of encouraging your staff. And I'd like to thank you for your honesty as well about your own sort of mental health journey with your father's passing. I'm sorry to hear that, but it's really encouraging that you're sort of leading the way, if you like, in sort of empowering your staff to sort of, you know, take ownership of their own well-being and work coherently together.
Yeah, I'm grateful. That's really kind of you to say, but I think, you know, for me, those values have really, really helped us. And I think the other one, and you're right about, you know, be curious and have fun. You know, how many people say have fun at work? You know, you know, for me, you spend your best waking hours at work.
Absolutely.
So you've got to enjoy it. You know, and if you're not enjoying it, do something else. Don't let it impact upon your well-being. Nobody forces you to stay somewhere. You've got choices as a grown-up
Absolutely.
adult. But I think the other one is around being open and transparent, and I think that really helps, because people are really, and I understand why, but people are really still sometimes quite sort of skeptical about the motive behind an organisation's doing X or Y, and
Yeah.
some of the things you sometimes hear, I think, blimey, I wish it was that clever to have thought that, but I genuinely haven't. It was like a pure mistake, and
I'm sorry, Nick.
people are using
We're
anybody who
getting
wants
some
to.
sound. We're getting some sound bounces here with our internet connection. Sorry about that to our listeners. I'm gonna push on now to talk a bit about how you're attracting and retaining your talents, because I want to make sure we sort of find out a bit more about that, so that those other housing professionals that are listening can hear about your fantastic best practice up there.
So our approach, I suppose, is the first thing we've done is refresh our brand, and I think we've successfully sort of launched that, but it's around, first of all, being clear on our purpose as an organisation. Secondly, linked, as you say, to the values and the behaviours. But thirdly, I suppose it's about the process itself. So from our view is the journey when people join us is not from the point at which the offer's made following the recruitment exercise, but it's actually the point at which they may be interested in working for us. So we're trying to nurture more relationships with people through LinkedIn and those before vacancies even occur. But also, making sure the job pack is really quite different. So, we're recruiting at the moment for an exec director for finance and governance, and if you look at the job pack for that, it's got a little vid in from me that uses Prezi video, but most of it's just a Mickey tape. Most of it's just like, hey, and explain about what Yorkshire's about and all those sorts of things. And I suppose we've done a big thing on our tone of voice as well.
Yeah.
So, for example, when I've posted stuff on Twitter for that vacancy, I've said, can you add up? Can you subtract as well? We could be our new exec director, finance and governance. It's that sort of mixing it up really and making it a bit more light-hearted and probably being a bit more fun about stuff. But also recruiting according to our values and our behaviours, so they are integral to the recruitment process. And we are really, really clear with people that working for us is not right for everybody. So we try and spell out why it's different and how it's different in terms of the approach, or the fact that we're not wanting to work in a traditional way. We want to push the boundaries, and this is part of, and again, this is in our business strategy, but we want to be one of the most innovative, one of the most dynamic, one of the most forward-thinking housing associations in the country. And we want people who absolutely share that passion and want to be part of that. And I accept for some people they don't perhaps want all of that, and that's fine. But they're probably not going to find a comfortable home at Yorkshire Housing. So it's just about being clear with people. And also, finally, the whole recruitment process is you just appoint the best actor, don't you, on the day, basically. So that's all it is. That's how the process works. So whoever blags their way through, look at me, whoever blags their way through the process gets the end result. But I mean, joking aside, we want to make sure that we get the fit, and that it isn't about how many years experience people have got of doing X or Y or Z. It's about whether the values and the behaviours that they've got fit and align with where we are as a business, and also, more importantly, where we want to be as a business.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, quite rightly, that quite a lot of people sort of fall into a housing career, and I can completely echo that. So I completely come across working in social housing because I saw an advert for customer service officer. And I thought, oh, I love customer service. That would be perfect for me. And then this whole massive world opened up of the different roles. And it's such a diverse industry to work in, but so interesting with so many career progression paths. So my question is about how can we encourage more younger people to choose this as a really valid career path? And I know you've been doing some work on Kickstart program. What's that?
Yeah. So I suppose Kickstart is obviously the government program for to get young and employed people back into work, and it's one of the things that's been come out of the pandemic, because obviously the impacts of the pandemic have disproportionately affected younger people. So it's a government initiative to give them 6 months of work experience, and for them to, I suppose, put a toe in the water. And that's where I'm coming from on this. So I think there's a whole blended approach of things like Kickstart initiative, where you give people an opportunity to show what they can do, give them 6 months to work out, is this for me? Yeah. All the things that you've spoken about in terms of, wow, I never even knew this existed. Yeah. And look at all these career paths I could have. But also, I'm absolutely passionate about apprenticeships, and also graduate programs as well, but not graduate programs where they spend like 6 months in different bits of the business. For me, it's actually about, well, where have you got gaps in your business, and actually utilizing the skills and energy of those graduates coming in, and almost being a virus for change in the business. You know, and coming in and going, I can see why you're trying to do that, but you know, have you thought of doing X and Y and Z? You go, no, but we'll give that a go, definitely. Yeah. So I think that whole sort of, for me, I think it's a bit of a blended approach of lots of different ways that you can get people to come in, and see what you've seen, and see what I've seen, see what everybody else is. Because once you get into housing, most people don't leave. It's a bit like that old song, isn't it? You can check out, but you can never leave. You know, it is one of those sort of careers. And it is fab. No 2 days are the same. You know, you're dealing with you know, a whole range of issues and opportunities in a real sort of customer focused environment. It's like, it's the gift that does genuinely keep on giving. Yeah. But most people don't know about it. It's one of the sort of employer's best kept secrets. And I suppose, I think it's about, for me, it goes back to what we talked about before about brand. I think, you know, we need to stop talking about bricks and mortar and numbers and start talking about all the stuff we're talking about this morning, which is what really engages people, really gets people excited, which is how it feels, what you're doing, how, you know, the values, behaviors, all that sort of, you know, how we can make a difference, as opposed to, you know, we're going to build X thousand homes, we manage X thousand homes, we collect this much rent. Yeah, it's dull as dishwater, all that, isn't it? It's about that sort of, how do you feel when you're in a place, and you know, giving your best for, I don't know, what, 35, 37, however many hours it is a week. Yeah,
I think that perfectly links into your priority about creating strong, resilient and innovative business. So there's a big tick there. So you've already incorporated that and embedded it in, which is fantastic to hear. So in relation to social housing, it sounds like you've very much got your finger on the pulse and you're sort of driving things forward in a really innovative way. But what do you think are going to be the future priorities? Because I know that you've got ambitions to build 8,000 additional homes by 2030. So housing need, demand and supply is always a hot topic in the sector. But what are the priorities you believe?
I think the first one you've touched upon perfectly, which is it was commonly accepted that there was a housing crisis prior to the pandemic. I think what the pandemic has done is brought into sharp focus that housing crisis is even worse than we thought it was, and actually a number of people are living in homes that are not suitable for their needs. So I think that whole thing about making sure there are the right homes in the right places for this and future generations is really key. And the second point, I think, is around if you think that 1 in 6 homes in the UK are social rented, and about, depending on who you speak to, but about 30% of all carbon emissions come from domestic properties. I think that our sector has a huge contribution to make to reducing the carbon output of UK PLC. And I think, that's through building new homes that don't have fossil fuel heating systems. So they're predominantly, it's about fabric first. In other words, it's about insulating the property and making it really sort of well insulated, but also reusing some of the heat or ventilation that's already in that property, as well as some other systems like air source and ground source heat pumps. So I think that's the first thing, but also then retrofitting to existing properties. And so one of the things that we're lobbying other organisations like the National Housing Federation and also the CBI for is to ask the government for a clear steer on hydrogen, if that's going to be part of a national energy strategy. So in the same way that it was 40 years ago for nuclear, we need that clear steer from government at a national level. Because if that is the case, we can be starting to fit now components to some of our existing, for example, heating systems that enable them to switch over to hydrogen as and when it comes online. So I suppose that we've got a big role to play, I think, in that whole carbon reduction, and then also linked to what I talked about before in terms of the 20-minute neighbourhood. Because again, if our people are travelling around less, that reduces their carbon footprint, but it also puts more investment and more money back into their local areas in terms of the money that they do spend. So for me, I think we've got a huge contribution to play with all of those agendas. And I think on a Yorkshire footprint, I think given the pace and of devolution, I think housing's got a huge role to play in helping those metro mayors, either those currently elected or those that are due to be elected over the next couple of years. I think we've got a huge role to play as part of the wider economic stimulus of the UK economy as we come out of the pandemic. And I think, you look at investment in housing makes absolute sense because of the knock-on positive impact that has across the wider economy.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when I worked in housing, I was very much about giving the housing staff a voice in amongst all of those statutory bodies, because we was a housing association. So it is very much about these housing officers are at the coalface, if you like, of a lot of issues that go on in the communities. And so forging those stronger relationships with your stakeholders, be it your local authority, the police services, the mental health services, it's all very key, isn't it? It's the way forward. But it sounds fantastic. I love what you're doing in relation to the smart homes agenda. I think that's great. Really ambitious about removing gas, and the hydrogen thing is, I think that's definitely something that's going to be more emerging in the future. Nick, it's been an absolute joy to speak to you. We've covered so much and I could carry on talking, but I hope that gives people a flavour of some of the things that you're doing over at Yorkshire Housing. If people want to reach out to you, Nick, how's the best way they can do that?
Okay, I have a passionate hatred of email, so Twitter is always my preferred comms of choice. So it's at Nick Atkin _YH, that's by far and away the best way to engage with me. So, and it's how we got together as well, isn't it? So
absolutely,
we're proof it works.
Absolutely. I remember we first met when I came up to Leeds, actually, on a CIH. And we was talking about innovation then, and that's what 3-4 years ago now. So you're doing incredibly well, and it's been an absolute delight to speak to you, Nick. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much for inviting me along. Really, really appreciate the chance to have a good old natter.
Thanks, Nick.